Hello and welcome to this edition of Me at the Piano. Today is April the 14th and exactly 114 years ago on this day R.M.S. Titanic struck an iceberg, and at around 20 to midnight. And I would like to pay tribute to all those, of course, who lost their lives. But I especially, on this occasion, would like to pay tribute to those behind the scenes. If you were standing on the promenade deck, 90 feet below you, into the bowels and the depths of the ship, were the engine and boiler rooms, where well over 100 people at any one time were doing their work to keep the ship in light, in heat and in motion, which is a huge feat considering the size of the vessel we're talking about. When the ship hit the berg, Thomas Andrews, the designer, happened to be on the ship. He was there to monitor the equipment, and he would also make his snagging list. He was sent down along with the chief carpenter and to assess from the captain's orders what damage there was. And the report was dire, as we all know. The engineers were given instructions to keep the vessel in heat and light, mainly light, of course, as much as possible to keep to buy as much time as possible. So hopefully a rescue ship could come and offload all the souls that are on board. As Chief Engineer Joseph Bell, he was mainly responsible, he was overall responsible for everything to do with the mechanics and the workings of the ship. His expertise were the engines, the great two massive steam engines, and under him was the second engineer, John Hesketh, and his expertise were in electrical mechanics, and in charge of the boilers, so all the stokers, the trimmers, and anything to do with keeping the boilers running properly was led by leading fireman Frederick Bassett. They had to completely redesign their way of thinking. They were there to make sure that the ship ran smoothly and from point A to point B. Now they're in a position where they knew that the ship was more than likely going to founder at the start of the hitting of the iceberg, and making sure that there was enough steam in the right places. So they had to extinguish some boilers where the cold seawater was about to get into the fireboxes of the boilers, which had red and white hot coals, and if you put the two together you create an explosion. So they had to draw some of the boilers and light the remaining boilers in order to maintain as much steam as possible to drive the dynamos to keep the lights going, and also to keep the Marconi system in operation. This also meant that they had to redirect steam channels into pipes that hadn't even been used. They had to start up dynamos which were spare, which were never to be used, only in emergencies, or because they had spares of just about everything on the mechanical side of things. So they had to get the blueprints out of all the electrical mechanical steam systems and redirect, and thinking about all of this as the ship was tilting and getting lower into the sea by the bow. I can't think of another word to express or explain what the word bravery means, but that would be it. In the last 3/4 of an hour of the ship's life, she took 2 3/4 hours roughly to sink, from being a floating palace to being in 2 bits on the bed of the Atlantic Ocean. Took about 2 3/4 hours. They did everything they could to keep the water down with extra pumps, diverting, as I said, all the things they had to do. They were ingenious in trying to do everything possible to save time for a hopeful rescue vessel. Unfortunately, in the last 3/4 of an hour, it became obvious that the ship was going to founder. Chief Engineer Bell said to all his team, if anybody wanted to leave, now is the time. And only the ones that left were ones that were asked to go up to help with the lifeboats. Everybody else stayed. As I say, this is the true meaning of the word bravery. Then we go on to the orchestra, the ship's band. These were also incredibly brave. They took it upon themselves, they weren't ordered to, but they took it upon themselves to play music as the ship was sinking, with an idea to maintain some sort of calm, and even for a brief moment, if it meant that passengers, just about anybody who was facing the depths of the North Atlantic, even just for a brief moment by music, if their minds were taken off the impending tragedy, then they thought at least that would help some way. They played right until the end. The ship was well into 35-degree tilt. It was almost impossible to stand, let alone play an instrument, but they carried on. The very last known tune that was played was the hymn Nearer My God to Thee, which I'm going to play for you now as part of my tribute. Some speculation, and some say that the last tune they heard from the lifeboats that were in the water was a tune called a bit of a melancholic ballad called Autumn, which has in places, I don't know that well, but it has similar musical structure to the hymn Near My God to Thee, but I would suggest that the vast majority of people were correct in what they heard was Near My God to Thee. I think if you were a musician and you were facing death, the tune you would be playing would not be a melancholic ballad, but more like, oh my God, this is it, in the back of your mind. So, Nearer My God to Thee will be what I'll play for you now, and also as a tribute to all merchantmen, sailors, and known as the maritime hymn, is a hymn called Eternal Father. This is also known as For Those in Peril on the Sea. So it's just I think fitting for this tribute. So it won't be long and drawn out, but I think just a couple of verses of Eternal Father and then ending with Nearer My God to Thee. And before I play those 2 songs, I'm going to just read out the members of the band. I've already mentioned the engineers. The list of everybody in the engineering department would be impossible to read all of them out. Well, not impossible, but headed by these 3 brave people here. Chief Engineer Joseph Bell, Second Engineer John Hesketh, and leading fireman Frederick Bassett. 8 members of the band. I will also give you their age of when they perished. So starting with Wallace Hartley, he was the bandmaster. If you can see this picture here, here's the chap in the middle. He played violin, and he was just 33 years old. Top left is a chap called John Clark. He was a bassist, and he was 29. To his right, top right, is Percy Taylor, who's a cellist, and he was 36. And then we go on to George Crins, who's middle left. He was a violinist, and he was 23. Then we have Theodore Brayley, to the right, posh looking chap with a top hat. He was a pianist, and he was just 24. Then we have John Hume, bottom left, known to his friends as Jock. He was a violinist, and he was 21. Bottom right is John Woodward, who was a cellist, and he was 32. Now there's one more, Mr. Roger Bryso. I couldn't find his picture, but I will do. But I can assure you that in spirit he's there with them and always will be with them. And Roger Bryso, he was a cellist, and he was a mere 20. So perhaps if you join me, I will now play just 2 verses of Eternal Father and Nearer My God to Thee.